So now that we know in general what our unit is about, the supply and demand for land, labor, and capital, what we're going to take a look at more specifically for a little bit is the supply and demand for labor. So just like in a product market, and like we set up just a little bit in our last video, is we will have a wage for workers and then the quantity of workers over here. And so what we know is that this represents the market, or the entire, all of the supply of workers and all of the demand for workers put together. And so what we know is that when wages are low down here, that the demand for workers would be very high. So a business wants to hire lots of workers if the wages for those workers are very low. And so if the wages of a worker were $5, let's say, then whatever business, McDonald's, might want to hire lots of people. And so the quantity demanded of workers would be very high. And if the wages increase, which is like a change in price of workers, then we know that the quantity of demanded workers is going to go down. And so we have this downward sloping demand curve for workers that looks like this. Remember, this is firms demanding workers. So they have a demand curve for labor. What we also know is that for the market, at a low wage, few people want to work at a lower wage. So the quantity supplied of workers is going to be very low. And as the wage goes up, lots more people are going to want to work in that labor market. So then we know we're going to have an upward sloping supply of labor. And so we know that the interaction of these two things, of individuals supplying their labor and businesses demanding those workers, is going to determine an equilibrium wage and an equilibrium quantity of workers. So this becomes equilibrium wage, and this becomes the number of people that are hired within that market. So just like you should have learned in previous units, this is just a change in wages and then therefore quantity supplied and quantity demanded. No curves are shifting, but curves could shift. So you may have some underlying factors or some outside factors that would shift one of those two curves. And so let's just say that this is the market for being a doctor. And this is the supply of workers that want to work at a variety of wages to be a doctor, and this is the demand for workers, hospitals hiring workers. And let's just say that for whatever reason, that the government passes a law that you have to go to school for twice as long, or the test to become a doctor becomes more difficult or more rigorous. Let's just say that it's more difficult to become a doctor. So there's new laws in place that make it take longer and is more difficult to become a doctor. What's going to happen? Is the demand for workers going to change, or is the supply of workers going to change? And what we should know is that that outside factor, that's going to impact the supply of workers. And so the supply of workers is going to shift. It's going to decrease. And so what we want to know is what happens to the market if the supply for workers decreases. So if it decreases like that, and we get S1 because of this new law, we know that the wages of doctors are going to go up. And we know that the quantity of doctors is going to go down. So that becomes the new equilibrium wage, and that becomes the new equilibrium quantity. And we could do this sort of analysis if the demand curve were to change. So one of the terms that we should start getting used to when it comes to the demand for workers is this idea of what's called a derived demand. It is probably the most important key term for this unit, is derived demand. And so what derived demand means is that the demand for workers is dependent upon the demand for the goods that those workers produce. So in this context, doctors produce, let's say, a service. And let's say that service is just let's say it's knee surgery is the service specifically that we're talking about. So if the demand for knee surgery goes up, so let's say the demand for knee surgery increases, what's going to happen to the demand for the workers that produce that service? Okay, so if the demand for knee surgeries goes up, well then the demand for the workers that produce that is going to change. This is a derived demand. It's derived from the good or the service that it's producing. Okay, so if you ignore, let's see if I can get rid of it. If you ignore my red line for a moment, okay, and let's just say that we had an increase in demand for knee surgeries. Well, what would happen to the wage and quantity of doctors? So we'll do this one in green. Well, we know that the demand for workers is going to go up. So we get D1 looks like that. We know that we would end up having a higher wage for doctors, and we would have more doctors being hired. Okay? So these are some things that you can get shifts, just like in the product market, you can get shifts. The biggest difference is that the demand for workers is derived from the good or service they're producing. Supply, on the other hand, could change for a variety of outside factors, depending upon if it's easier or more difficult to become whatever it is that job entails. The last thing that we're going to do is look at what happens when the government tries to intervene in the labor market. So we're going to take a look at a government intervention, specifically what is called a price floor in the labor market. Okay? So a price floor, the example that we're going to look at, the main one for labor markets, is minimum wage. So using a basic supply and demand graph for labor, let's graph what the market for, let's say, fast food workers. Because minimum wage often applies to the fast food industry. So if we say this is wage, and this is our quantity of workers, again, we have a supply of labor and a demand for labor. Now, let's just say, based upon our simple analysis of economics, that the wage in this market should be, the equilibrium wage should be, let's just say $5 an hour. Okay, so we have $5 per hour is what the equilibrium wage should be, and there's supposed to be something, let's just make up a number, let's say 5,000 people hired at $5 an hour. But what the government comes in and says is $5 is not fair. Okay? Not fair. So what we're going to do is we're going to mandate a higher wage. So we're going to say $5 is not fair. So right now it's $7.25, but the arguments right now are it should be $10 or it should be $15. And so let's say they say, it has to be $10 per hour. Now that does not change the demand for workers or the supply of workers. It changes the price, or again, what we call the wage, paid to workers. So if we know anything about economics, that's just a change in the price and therefore a change in the quantity supplied and quantity demanded. So what does that look like on our graph? Well, a price floor is going to be set above the wage that we have. So the market is saying $5 is the wage, and the government says, no, it should be 10. Again, as much as we might want that to change the actual equilibrium price, it doesn't. It just sets a new higher price up here at 10. And so what's going to happen to the quantity demanded by firms of workers? Well, the quantity demanded is going to go from 5,000, it's going to drop. So as the price goes up, the quantity demanded by firms is going to go down. So we're going to end up with fewer jobs available because businesses don't want to hire as many people at $10 an hour as they do at $5 an hour. So we're going to change that to 4,000. So there's 4,000 jobs available, or the companies, firms are demanding 4,000 people. But what happens to the number of people that want to work? What happens to the quantity supplied of workers at $10 compared to $5? Well, we know that's going to go up. So as the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up. And we end up at this point right here. So this becomes the quantity supplied of workers, which we're going to call 6,000. So there's 6,000 people wanting to work at a $10 minimum wage, but only 4,000 jobs available. So it goes from at $5, there were 5,000 people willing and able to work and 5,000 jobs available. And now at $10 an hour, there's a lot more people that want to work, but a lot fewer jobs available. So this is one of the impacts of minimum wage. One of the arguments against increasing the minimum wage is that you're going to have fewer jobs available and lots of people wanting to work those jobs. And so it's going to cause a lot of different repercussions. And so the people that are anti-increasing the minimum wage would argue that it's going to hurt the people that it's intended to help. So who are the people that get fired in this process? Who are the 1,000 people from the 5,000 to the 4,000? Well, those would be people whose skills are valued at, let's say, $5, $6, $7, $8, and $9 an hour. So if your skill is $6, $7, $8, or $9 an hour, you're the ones that are getting fired. So the lower educated, the less experienced, those are the people that are going to be fired. And the people that are worth, you could say, and you might not like that word, but those are the people that produce $10 an hour worth of goods and services. Those are the people that keep their jobs.